Robert Redford stood as one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. Early this morning, the 89-year-old actor passed away at his Utah home. His representative confirmed the news. Legends in Hollywood don't only leave behind films, they also leave behind secrets, rivalries, and stories that linger after the final curtain. The world was stunned by Redford's death, yet the rumors that followed outshouted the tributes. Beneath the charming smile and golden reputation was a man carrying old grudges, fractured friendships, and rivalries that defined his career. One name in particular still echoes, a star so powerful, unforgettable, and unlikely to honor Redford in death. What force kept two giants of cinema apart, even until the last moment? The closing chapter of Robert Redford's life. When word spread on September 16, 2025, that Robert Redford had died, it sparked reflection across Hollywood and beyond. Audiences everywhere stopped to honor a man who shaped American film for over 6 decades. Few actors balanced substance with fame the way Redford did. He was a leading man, an Oscar-winning filmmaker, and the founder of Sundance, which forever transformed independent film. Still, as memorials poured in, many thought of the quieter end to his life, where he had already begun stepping out of the public eye. The defining moment came in 2018, when Redford openly discussed retirement. He had hinted for years, but while promoting The Old Man and the Gun, he confirmed it would be his final role. The story of an aging outlaw unable to let go became a poetic mirror of his own journey. Speaking to the Associated Press, Redford explained, "I figure now that I'm in my 80s, it's time to slow down and spend more days with my wife and family." Yet, he couldn't fully walk away without one last role. In 2019, he appeared briefly in Avengers Endgame, reprising Alexander Pierce from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. The scene was small, but its meaning was immense. Known for dramas and character-driven films, his Marvel appearance caught many off guard, but he said his curiosity was about the new tools and techniques of modern blockbusters. Directors Joe and Anthony Russo later shared that Redford told them his shoot on Endgame would be his last day as an actor, making that cameo the symbolic end of his legendary career. Afterward, Redford pulled further away from Hollywood. By 2020, he sold his longtime Utah horse ranch. That move allowed him to focus on his Provo Canyon home and his Sundance property, both central to his life beyond acting. Utah wasn't just his residence, it was the foundation of Sundance, a cultural legacy that gave countless directors their start. Redford's final years unfolded quietly with loved ones and nature. His passions shifted toward art, painting, and environmental work, filling most of his days. With his wife, Sybil Zegars, and his children and grandchildren, he embraced a private rhythm focused on creativity and family instead of fame. Even without starring roles, Redford kept telling stories. He produced projects behind the scenes and contributed to AMC's Dark Winds, which premiered in 2022. In 2025, he appeared briefly in its second season, a quiet role that carried weight for its rarity. That performance proved to be his last. He died peacefully at his Sundance home, closing a life lived entirely on his own terms. The tributes afterward revealed the depth of his reach. Filmmakers credited Sundance for their beginnings, and fans remembered the unforgettable characters he embodied. Still, alongside the admiration, Redford's death revived talk of his complicated reputation and old clashes in Hollywood. He had shared sets with icons, but also fought with them, raising questions about who might appear at his funeral. Although his final years seemed serene, Redford's story was built on personal battles. Before fame, he endured sickness, loss, and heartbreak. These early experiences shaped the choices he made, both privately and in his art. awareness of life's fragility stayed with him for decades. The pain of illness was soon replaced by something far worse in his teens. In 1955, when Redford was 18, his mother, Martha, died during childbirth. Losing her so young was a wound he often said never healed. It meant entering adulthood with an emptiness that shaped the man he became. Her death also gave him the reflective nature that later defined him, even when audiences saw him as Hollywood's golden boy. After her loss, his life in Van Nuys, California grew more complicated. Though surrounded by people, he often felt detached. He later admitted he was withdrawn, preferring his own thoughts to crowds, a feeling that marked his youth. Marriage to historian Lola Van Wangen in 1958 looked like a brighter chapter, but tragedy arrived almost instantly. Their first son, Scott, died of sudden infant death syndrome at just 10 weeks old. Though rarely discussed publicly, the grief remained for life. That heartbreak deepened his sense of fragility and his instinct to guard his family from outside eyes. Robert and Lola later welcomed 3 children, Shauna, James, and Amy, and their marriage supported him during his rise. Yet the shadow of loss would strike again decades later. His son James, who battled a rare liver disease, endured 2 transplants and lived with constant health struggles. Even while battling illness, James pursued his path as a filmmaker and activist, dedicating his work to causes tied to the environment and social justice. Sadly, in 2020, James lost his life at 58 to bile duct cancer, connected to earlier health struggles. Redford was 84 when the loss came, and he openly shared how deeply it broke him. Losing one child leaves a wound that never fades, but enduring the loss of 2 left Redford carrying a grief few could imagine. Yet personal sorrow wasn't the only challenge he was forced to endure. His marriage with Lola stretched nearly 30 years before it ended in divorce in 1985. Redford never explained the reasons behind their split, choosing not to offer his private matters as public spectacle. For him, such details were personal, and his silence highlighted his lifelong insistence on protecting his privacy. After many solitary years, he eventually remarried in 2009, this time to German artist Sybil Zagers. Together, they built a later life rooted in creativity, nature, and seclusion. It was a life far from the spotlight that had once defined him. Unlike many stars, Redford refused to put his family on display for attention or sympathy. After enduring so much loss, he believed the only way to safeguard his peace and family was to keep them away from Hollywood's cameras. Redford was never shaped by the system. He followed his own instincts and never allowed the industry to mold him. While this earned respect from some, it also left certain connections fractured. Hollywood was never truly home for Redford. Despite being one of the world's most recognized stars, he felt uneasy with its machinery. From his earliest roles, he questioned the studio model and never shied away from voicing his frustrations. He frequently criticized studio politics and the heavy bureaucracy attached to filmmaking. Where others stayed silent or compromised to get projects made, Redford pushed for artistic freedom, even when it brought conflict. A prime example of this resistance came with The Great Gatsby in 1974. When Redford was cast as Gatsby, the film seemed destined for success, a classic novel, top actors, and a major studio. Yet Redford disliked both the script and surrounding casting choices, and he made his disappointment clear. He strongly disagreed with its direction, and he didn't hide that fact. Ultimately, he refused to attend the film's premiere, an unusual move for a star of his stature, and made a bold statement about his convictions. That defiance shaped much of his career. He often clashed with studios, pulling out of films if he felt the vision was compromised. For instance, he was said to have abandoned executives, Redford was both a prized draw and a risky bet. Though beloved by audiences, his unpredictability worried many in the business. Executives also grew frustrated by his habit of arriving late or not showing up at all for meetings. For most actors, this would have been career-ending, but Redford's influence and talent made him irreplaceable. He could afford such risks because his reputation as both actor and filmmaker kept him valuable, even when he was difficult. Yet Redford didn't see himself as rebelling for attention. He simply rejected Hollywood's obsession with profit and power over art. This conviction inspired one of his greatest legacies, creating the Sundance Institute and Film Festival. Redford envisioned Sundance as a refuge where emerging voices could thrive outside the grip of studios. He gave emerging writers and directors the platform to tell stories without commercial compromise. Sundance transformed filmmaking. Directors like Quentin Tarantino, Chloe Zhao, and Ryan Coogler launched their careers there, reshaping cinema in its wake. For Redford, Sundance stood as more than a festival. It was a direct rebuke to Hollywood's dominance, offering space for daring, original work over formulaic blockbusters. But his independence extended beyond film. He used his fame to push for environmental protections, Native American rights, and LGBTQ advocacy, weaving these beliefs into projects he supported. Films like The Candidate and All the President's Men entertained while also questioning authority and challenging institutions. To Redford, art and activism were inseparable. He viewed cinema as a way to spotlight urgent causes. Yet his refusal to play along with Hollywood traditions sometimes isolated him. Rumors spread of actors and directors he never worked with again after falling out. But in true fashion, he never aired disputes publicly. Silence, he believed, was stronger than public feuds. This approach made him respected but enigmatic, leaving colleagues guessing about his true feelings. Still, anyone who lost his trust knew it without question. His independence, both a source of admiration and conflict, defined his legacy. For each person who praised his integrity, another saw him as stubborn or arrogant. But Redford wasn't performing a role. His career mirrored his private life, built on boundaries and firm principles. And though he avoided naming names, some broken partnerships were too public to ignore. One such rift involved a screenwriter central to his early success, a collaboration that helped cement his rise. Yet even brilliance couldn't shield the relationship from Hollywood's egos and conflicts. The fallout with William Goldman became one of Redford's defining disputes. Goldman, a two-time Oscar winner, wrote some of the most iconic scripts of the era. His words launched Redford's breakout in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, forever tying him to Sundance. Goldman went on to pen multiple classics, his reputation marking him as one of the cinema's greatest screenwriters. Their early collaboration seemed like lightning in a bottle. Goldman supplied sharp storytelling, while Redford delivered charisma and vision. Together, they shaped unforgettable pieces of cinema history. Beneath that success, however, creative clashes would eventually become one of the harshest breaks in Redford's career. The conflict reached its height during the production of All the President's Men in 1976, the adaptation of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's Watergate investigation. For Redford, this project meant everything. He secured the rights to the book himself. He both produced the film and took the lead role of Woodward. To Redford, this was not just another movie. It was a message about truth, journalism, and political power. Because of that, he demanded perfection in every aspect, from casting to the script. William Goldman was chosen to adapt the screenplay, and at first, it seemed ideal. Fresh from his Oscar win for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Goldman was known for crafting gripping drama out of tough material. Yet as filming progressed, Redford and director Alan Pakula grew more unhappy with Goldman's drafts. They felt the script leaned too heavily on style and missed the gritty details of investigative journalism the story required. Redford later claimed he and Pakula rewrote most of the screenplay, keeping only about 10% of Goldman's original work. That public statement from Redford cut Goldman deeply. For a writer proud of his craft and central to Redford's earlier successes, being told his work had been nearly erased was a painful betrayal. Goldman maintained that although revisions happened, the structure of the film was still his, and he resented Redford for minimizing his role. Even with the discord, Goldman ultimately won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for All the President's Men. But that recognition came with shadows. Inside Hollywood, many whispered about how much of the final script truly came from Goldman's writing. The Writers Guild of America reviewed the drafts and ruled that Goldman deserved sole credit for the screenplay. That decision confirmed that, despite Redford and Pakula's claims, Goldman's contribution was essential. For Goldman, though, the damage lingered. He felt Redford had undermined his importance in one of the biggest projects of his career, and their once strong partnership was undone by pride and control. Neither man ever made peace publicly, and though they pursued other projects, their collaboration ended for good. Redford seemed willing to live with the separation, while Goldman carried bitterness for years after. To this day, many still ask what more they could have created together if their partnership had survived. Could more films like Butch Cassidy and All the President's Men have been born from their teamwork? Or was the rift inevitable because Redford insisted on shaping every project to his exact vision? Redford never spoke at length about Goldman again, while Goldman kept his disappointment alive but quiet. Hollywood has seen countless partnerships collapse, yet this one stood apart because these two once defined each other's success. Their falling out ended one of Redford's greatest creative bonds and highlighted his uneasy ties with Hollywood. Still, this would not be the final time Redford clashed with a major figure. After Goldman, another star with equal influence and pride would collide with Redford's unyielding nature. Robert Redford versus Jack Nicholson. When two giants rise together, comparisons and rivalries almost always follow. Born in the 1930s, both Redford and Nicholson became household names by the late 60s and early 70s, each symbolizing a different side of American film. Redford embodied the polished all-American hero, while Nicholson brought raw rebellion and unpredictability. Though they were rarely close, insiders often pointed to a quiet rivalry between them. Their differences emerged most clearly during the making of The Great Gatsby. When Paramount prepared the film in the early 1970s, Nicholson's name was considered for the role. Jay Gatsby was among the most coveted roles of the decade, a chance to play one of literature's most iconic characters. Ultimately, Redford won the part, building on the success of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But Nicholson doubted the choice. He believed Redford was too polished, too privileged to capture Gatsby's haunted ambition. Gatsby, he argued, was defined by scars and restless striving. Nicholson thought he could bring that desperation to life in ways Redford could not. His doubts about Redford's casting were not hidden. He once remarked that Redford looked too much like someone who never had to fight his way up. To Nicholson, Gatsby demanded hunger and grit Redford lacked. It wasn't meant to insult Redford's ability, but it reflected Nicholson's starkly different view of the character. Such remarks left an impression on Hollywood. Redford, careful with his public image, avoided stirring conflict, but Nicholson was outspoken and unfiltered. By voicing his doubts, Nicholson not only underlined their differences, but also fueled speculation about their rivalry. Nicholson never got to prove his vision of Gadsby. Yet his prediction lingered after the 1974 Gadsby disappointed critics, who often faulted the film for its glossy surface and lack of depth. And Gadsby was not their only near collision. Both were considered for Michael Corleone in The Godfather. The role, however, went to Al Pacino, who redefined mafia films forever. Another overlap came with The Sting in 1973, one of Redford's signature successes. Nicholson was offered the role of Johnny Hooker, but declined, instead pursuing Chinatown, which earned him lasting acclaim. That choice paid off for both, as Redford gained one of his biggest hits, and Nicholson delivered one of his defining performances. Still, the overlap reinforced that they often competed in the same space. Despite this, Redford and Nicholson never worked on the same film. For two actors of such stature, their absence together on screen speaks volumes. Explanations vary. Some believe Nicholson avoided teaming with Redford, while others think Redford didn't want to share his spotlight with another powerhouse. Unlike his break with Goldman, however, his dynamic with Nicholson never erupted publicly. Still, the rivalry simmered in comments, competing roles, and professional distance. For audiences, it stayed largely behind the curtain, visible only in occasional quotes and what-if scenarios. The contrast deepened Redford's image, admired but sometimes viewed as too polished and overly controlled. Which other actor do you think Robert Redford clashed with? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out the next one waiting for you.